pleased to welcome Errol Lord from the University of Pennsylvania, where he is an associate professor in the Department of Philosophy. I should say you might have provided us with best titles that ever featured on the Trinity Term card, since you're going to tell us about Of Soulmates and Expected Children, how to be Kantian about the ethics of love. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you. I'm going to stand at least for this talk bit. Good, so thanks for coming. We good with the, yeah, okay. Good, so actually, maybe I should ask you before I start, what range do I have here walking around? All right, good. How wide does that lens go? Okay, cool. All right, so the goal of this paper is to defend an account of the ethics of love, and the kind of bigger goal is to develop a normative ethical view secular normative ethical view that has love at the center. And I call the view that I defend romantic Kantianism. I guess, I don't know, this might be helpful for some people and probably not helpful at all for others. This is kind of my attempt of writing something along the lines of David Velleman's Love as a Moral Emotion, or Kieran Setia's Love and the Value of a Life, I think is what it's called. So it doesn't come out in the handout really, but it comes out in the paper a lot. A lot of the paper is me kind of contrasting my view with theirs, because they also have a kind of Kantian views about it. But in the end, my view and their views come apart quite a bit, and I think for the good for my view. All right, so there are kind of three main parts of the paper. At least the second and the third could be their own papers. So the paper is very long, although I tricked some people into thinking it wasn't as long by good typesetting. And it really could be that the second and third parts are just their own paper, but I wanted to put it in one to see the kind of whole picture. So the first part is a little bit artificial, although it's where we get the soulmates and the expected children. The first part motivates one of the main claims of romantic Kantianism by showing that it can explain what's going on in these pair of cases that are kind of stand in tension with each other. And the trick is to try to, as we'll see, is to try to find the particular qualities of people in something general. And that's going to, the romantic Kantianism's ability to do that is going to be the kind of the first initial motivation for taking it seriously. The second part of the paper is about these four traditional problems that you can find in the literature about love and its justification. So the literature about, the kind of ethical literature about love is kind of strangely fragmented. So there's one literature that focuses on love like very narrowly, and they're thinking love as the kind of thing that justifies rather extreme amounts of partiality. And the main fight there is what are the kinds of things that can justify love. So the second part is about that literature and about these four traditional problems for the sort of view that romantic Kantianism is. And then that second part, I argued that I can solve those problems. You have to bring some more stuff in, some stuff that I've developed in other work, but once you bring that in, you can solve those traditional problems. And then the third part is the part that's most about normative ethics kind of properly construed, and it is about so first the connection between love and respect. So that's the place where I try to generalize it out to something close to a full-blown normative ethical theory. And then the second part is about the upshot of that for how much partiality is justified on the resulting view. So Setia, this is where the main contrast with Setia comes out. He has a very surprising view where it turns out that the conditions under which you can be very, very partial towards someone are very, very minimal. So think about what you might ordinarily think you're justified in doing towards your partner or your children or your parents. So rather extreme levels of partiality. It seems like it's justified to dedicate large parts of your life to those people. On Setia's view, it's very easy to be justified in doing that. So there are lots and lots and lots of people, many, many more people than the ones that you stand in close relationships with, that are such that you're justified in being partial like that towards them. So I don't like that. I mean, he's kind of ambivalent about it himself. It's a kind of classic, here's a weird conclusion from plausible premises situation. So he actually doesn't really ever endorse it exactly, but my view is like his in many ways, and it doesn't have that conclusion, and so the very, very end is explaining that. Okay, so, right, so if you looked at the paper, the handout is basically just a shortened version of that guidebook section at the end, which I'm very glad that I wrote, because it made it a lot easier to make the handout. So let's just go. I'm going to go through all three parts if I can, if I have the time. We'll see if I actually can explain everything. Good, so let's just start with the soulmates and expected children. I'm not going to read out all the details because it doesn't matter so much, but Atalo and Ifra are the soulmates, and I put a description of what their relationship is like and kind of took lots of things that people tend to say about romantic love and put those details in. So kind of whatever view about that you might have, I think the relevant details will be in the description of the case. So those are the soulmates, and I'm assuming that their love is justified, and that justified love does make extreme levels of partiality justified. So they are dedicated to each other in the way that romantic partners generally are. So that's those are the soulmates. And then the expected child is their expected child. So the details of this one are a little bit more important. So as I'm thinking of it, Ifra is pregnant. She's far enough in the pregnancy where it's plausible that she's pregnant with a kind of determinate person. It's kind of fun to think about different versions of it where that's not true, but this is the one that I'm going to go with. But not far along enough where the person is known to them in any particular way. I mean, kind of by description maybe, but they don't know the determinate person that the expected child actually is. Now, here's the important thing. I think that they can know about their future selves that they will love the expected child. Now, maybe they actually do love I'm kind of not going to say anything about whether they, at time, love or justifiably love the expected child. What I'm interested in is the fact that it seems very plausible that they know that they will love the child once the child is born. And I think it's banal observation. Almost all parents are in that position, at this position. Again, interesting to think about earlier times in the pregnancy and exactly what might be true at the earlier times, but I think once you get this far along, very plausible that they know. Okay, so though all of that's true, I mean, I think this can all be true in actual cases, but there's it's kind of easy to bring out attention about the way we think about the justification of love by thinking about these cases. So first, start with Ifra and Atalo, and you can ask, what are the facts that justify, let's just focus on Atalo's love for Ifra. And there's a range of views. Like one view says, the anti-rationalist view says that love is not the sort of thing that is justified. And lots of people like that. I mean, the people who do like that like it because it has a kind of egalitarian air to it. No matter what you're like, you can be loved without blame or something. So that sounds nice. I actually think it's kind of a horrible kind of egalitarianism because on that view, love is just not the kind of thing that can be justified or fitting. So another way of putting it is that on that view, nobody is lovable. Because to be lovable is just to be the fitting object of love. So I think I like the egalitarianism of that, but this is a kind of bad egalitarianism because that means no one's justified in loving you no matter how good you are. So that one's bad. So if you don't have an anti-rationalist view, then you have a rationalist view, and you think that there are some kinds of facts that justify love. So now think about Ifra and Atalo. So I think there's a kind of range of explanations or justifications that Ifra should be happy with. So on one, here's one that I think she shouldn't like the anti-rationalist one, because on that there's no explanation of why he's justified, because it's just not the right kind of thing. Here's another one which I think that she should at least at first be unhappy with, which is the Kantian one. So the kind of textbook Kantian says every single person has some feature that makes them lovable. So it turns out on that view that everybody is lovable. So this is the good kind of egalitarianism, I think. So it's egalitarian because everybody's equal in this way, everybody's lovable, but it does think that love is the kind of thing that's justified, and it's justified in virtue of some shared property. And Kant's actual view was kind of rational capacities, where those were the things that make everybody lovable, or all persons. Now, I don't think that Ifra should really like that one either, because it just doesn't differentiate her in any way. So if the context was she wanted to know why Atala loved her, or was justified in loving her, rather than her romantic rival, Becca, I don't think it would satisfy her to hear that it's in virtue of some feature that she shares with Becca and with, Charles Manson and Donald Trump and Boris Johnson, and name whatever people you want on the other side of that contrast. Okay, so that one I also don't think should satisfy her. What would be satisfying is a kind of romantic explanation. And the romantic explanations or justifications appeal to the ways that she actually is, or appeals to something particular about her. And those would be the kind of things that Atala should at least cite if he's trying to satisfy her in this context, where he's justifying loving her rather than Becca. Okay, so suppose he kind of talks himself into this view, this more romantic view, that says that what justifies him in loving Ifra are her particularities. But once you get into that view, he might start getting nervous about the expected child, because that view says that love is justified by the particularities, and who's to know what particularities the child is going to have? It gets worse if you take a stand on what the particularities might be. So suppose you have this Neoplatonic view and you think that what justifies love is beauty. That would be great. Ifra would be very happy with that explanation, that he's justified in loving her because of her beauty. But who's to say that the expected child is going to be beautiful? So that seems like beauty is a kind of contingent property, and so because of that, there's kind of no guarantee that the expected child will be beautiful. And if that's true, then he might be shaken about his claim to know that he will justifiably love the expected child. Now note, so that's the kind of tension between this drive to explain yourself in terms of the particularities, and then this other drive towards egalitarianism. And you can see how some of the views do well with Ifra and Atala, and some of the views do well with the expected child, and it's not really clear if any of the views do well with both of them. Okay, so that is the kind of motivating puzzle. And I bring out these constraints, the romantic constraint and stability constraint. The idea is if some view could explain both of those things, then that view would be nicely motivated. And I do think that romantic Kantianism can explain both of the constraints. They do. So in particular, the particular claim that allows it to do that is what I call romantic Kantianism about lovability. Again, lovability is just if you're lovable, then it's fitting to love you. And there are two claims that the first is just the Kantian claim, and this is the core thing that I said before to distinguish the Kantian claim from the other ones, the other views. It just says every person is lovable in virtue of having dignity. Kind of neutral about what dignity consists in. So you could have theories about that. Kant's theory was that it was the rational capacities. That one's kind of dumb, I think, so I wouldn't recommend accepting that one. But Satya thinks it's just being human. I like that one a little bit better, or maybe being a person, where being a person isn't identical to having the rational capacities. But I'm going to be mostly neutral about that. And dignity is basically just defined kind of functionally in the paper. It's just the thing that plays this particular role. One way you might think of it is it's the property that gives things moral status, or agents moral status. Okay, so that's just the run-of-the-mill Kantian view, but then there's a twist, and this is the romantic part, which is I call the romantic claim, which says every person has dignity in virtue of manifesting an utterly determinate dignity. So one of the main moves in the paper is having a particular view about the metaphysics of dignity. The particular view is that dignity is a determinable property that's made determinate by the particularities of particular people. So the kind of classic paradigm determinable properties are the colors. So just think of the bottle. It's blue, and in virtue of that, it has something in common with the color of this lid and the color of that laptop case. But of course, they don't have the same shade of blue, right? They don't look the same in the determinate way. They all have different shades. So blue in all three of the objects is made determinate by some particular shade of blue. And blue in general doesn't have a color look. I mean, it's a kind of spectrum property. But if someone said, like, what does blue look like, the determinable, that's a bad question. It doesn't look like anything. Only particular shades of blue have a color look. And then blue, the determinable property, is, well, maybe a kind of disjunction of all of those determinate shades. Okay, the other example that's helpful to think about are aesthetic properties. So in the paper, I use the property of grace. So that's also a determinable property. If someone asks you, what does grace, the determinable property, look like? You would say that's a bad question. It doesn't have a look. I mean, even if you got more specific, what does grace in painting look like? Bad question. If you lined up all of the graceful paintings, there wouldn't be some look that they have in common. Rather, grace is a determinable property that's made determinate by the kind of utterly particular features of all of the paintings that are graceful. Again, it's kind of hard to say exactly what the determinable property is. The most popular view, though, is it's some kind of disjunction. There are kind of these ranges of similarity, and then if you're within a certain range of similarity in the determinate ways, then you count as having the determinable property. Okay, so the romantic claim is that dignity is like that. So dignity is a determinable property, and it's made determinate by the very particular features of people. So here's an easy way, if you're just like, I don't understand what that means, here's an easy way to see what it means by making the view more filled in. So you could think that you could kind of blend the Kantian view with the Neoplatonic view, and you could think dignity is beauty. Beauty is a paradigmatic determinable property. It's just like grace. I could have said exactly the same stuff about the beautiful paintings with the graceful paintings with beauty. Same thing with people. I mean, you can just think of the top 3 most beautiful people that you know. Their beauty is made manifest by their determinate features. There's not something in common. There's not some like thing in common, some particular feature in common. Probably, hopefully you have a diverse loves. Rather, there are some particular features that determine or manifest their beauty, and they're beautiful in virtue of those things. Okay, so romantic claim just says that's how dignity is. Okay, so now this is the way the view finds the particular in the general, right? So it says there is this general feature, having dignity, all persons have it. That means that everybody's lovable. But in order to kind of fully explain or account for each individual's dignity, you have to appeal to their particularities. Just like in order to account for the gracefulness of all of the graceful paintings, you would have to deal with the particularities. So if you had like a book, you were writing a book of all the graceful paintings. If it weren't a determinable, that would be easy. It would just be a description of the thing that they all have in common. But that's not how grace is, and so you wouldn't be able to do that. You wouldn't be able to fully account for the gracefulness of all the graceful paintings without writing a description of all of the particular ways that they are. Or better yet, just taking a photograph of all of them and binding the photographs together. Okay, all right, so that's the first part, and that was like way too long, but I needed to explain the main idea. The other things should be somewhat faster. And I might actually go pretty quick in this second part, because some of you surely know about it, and it's not as exciting. So here's the set. I'll do the setup of the problem so that everybody's at least on the same page with that, even though I'm not going to kind of go through all of them. So the setup of the problems is that there's a group of views about the justification of love that all have a common feature. So they all think that love is justified by a non-relational property of the beloved. So non-relational only in the sense that the facts that justify the love don't have anything to do with the relationship between the beloved and the lover. Romantic Kantianism is a view like this because it says that dignity is the thing that makes people lovable, and that's a non-relational property. So Jacob has dignity and is thus lovable no matter what relationship I stand in with Jacob. And the same is true for every other person in the whole entire world. Okay, so that's the setup. There are lots of views like this, and lots of people end up being attracted to them at the beginning, but there are these problems that many, many, many people think are completely damning. And you don't really, you get the gist of the problems just by the following description. So basically, in order to really account for all the facts, you have to appeal to something relational. And I think that's true. And so I agree with the people that push these objections if what they're trying to show is that non-relational facts can't explain all the facts. So I agree that it's just not the case that non-relational facts can explain everything. Okay, so I guess in a way I agree with the conclusion, or one of the conclusions that people draw, but I don't think that shows that the non-relational views about lovability are false. Okay, so let me just tell you about two of the problems, because three of them kind of group together and can be solved using the same tools. So the first one, which I think many people are most moved by, the first one is called the constancy problem. So imagine Ifra and Atalo, spend their lives together, and near the end, Ifra goes through like radical change. So it's a little bit unclear what the limits of this are, but imagine she develops dementia, and I don't know, imagine it's kind of halfway through. Some people's intuitions change when it's kind of she's fully gone, but imagine she's kind of halfway through it, so sometimes recognizes him, sometimes remembers their shared past, etc., but often it's not like that. So the intuition is that Atalo remains justified in loving Ifra even through that radical change. And on some of the non-relational views, it's unclear why that would be. So, just take the Neoplatonic one again. Suppose it's beauty. Beauty is a contingent property, so you can imagine that through the radical change, she loses her beauty. And then it looks like that view says he's no longer justified in loving her. And many people have the intuition that that's wrong and maybe bad, morally bad. Okay, so that's constancy. What's the other? So why don't we go with promiscuity as the illustration of the other kind of problem. So take the beauty one again, or just yeah, so there are a lot of other beautiful people, a lot of other beautiful potential partners for Atala. Promiscuity problem asks, if beauty is what justifies his love for Ifra, is he allowed to just go love everybody else that's beautiful? Or maybe everybody else who's beautiful in the same way that she is, kind of has the same particular traits that make her beautiful. And again, people think, or some people think that his reasons for loving Ifra are much stronger than his reasons for loving other beautiful people, or other people that are like Ifra in the relevant ways. And the people that push these problems the hardest are people who defend the relationships view, which says that facts about relationships are the things that justify. And you can see how that view is tailor-made to explain these things. So he can still permissibly love Ifra through radical change because they still stands in the relationship with her. And Atala's reasons for loving Ifra are stronger than his reasons for loving the other beautiful people because he has the relationship with her. And I think, maybe this isn't true, but I think Nico Kolodny was the first person to at least name these things in this way in his famous paper defending the relationships view. Okay, so there are two more constraints that I think you need to satisfy in order to explain all of this. One of them is the constancy thing. It just says Atala can remain justified in loving Ifra across radical change. And then the kind of more complicated one, the relational weight constraint, which says that the weight of love's reasons can be impacted by some relational facts. So I agree. Some people who have non-relational views don't agree to that one, but I think that is, you kind of have to appeal to, or you have to explain that in order to explain everything. And then I have two principles or claims that, if you accept them, allows the romantic Kantianism to explain these constraints. So one of them is called relational modifiers. And that says relational facts can modify the weight of one's reasons to love. So I think, like the relationships view, I think that the fact that Ifra is Atala's soulmate plays a role in explaining the weight of his reasons to love her. But it doesn't provide another reason to love her. So the reason to love her is provided by her particularities or by her dignity. Rather, it just modifies the weight of those reasons. So he has objectively sufficient reason to love anybody because everybody's lovable. But the weight of his reasons to love Ifra is weightier than his reasons to love Becca or a stranger. Because he stands in the relevant relationship with her. And then the other principle is called relational shape. So relational facts can shape the direction of A's reasons to love B. So this is just a very old point from at least Aristotle, that the kind of relationship you're in makes a difference to the reasons that you have. I take the kind of extreme case, so Ifra and Becca again, the romantic rivals. So you might think it's actually impermissible for Atala to love Becca in virtue of his relationship with Ifra. And that would be bad for me because I said everybody's lovable. But I don't think that's true. So I think it is permissible for him to love Becca, but the shape of the reasons that he has to kind of act on that love is just different because of the relationship that he stands in with Becca and the relationship he stands in with her is kind of determined or partly determined by the relationship he has with Ifra. And so it is impermissible for him to have a kind of romantic relationship with Becca, I'm assuming. That's not like a necessary truth, but I'm assuming they have a traditional monogamous romantic relationship, and in virtue of that, it is impermissible for him to have that kind of relationship with Becca. But that doesn't mean it's impermissible for Atala to love Becca. It would just be that relationship would have to take a different shape. Okay. Oh wow. So a minute for the last part. I'm going to take a little more than that, but that's all I'm going to say about the second part. So the last part, some of this is easy. now the setup is pretty robust. So Kantians, going back to Kant, generally think that their love and respect are intimately connected. And respect is kind of one way of reading Kant's ethics is kind of the central notion. And so there's some hope that you can derive a Kantian ethics from this by doing enough to explain the relationship between love and respect. As it happens, Kant says very, very mysterious things himself about this relationship. Velleman's paper about love as a moral emotion does a little bit more, although I think there's not really an explanation either. There's just a kind of good, clear statement of what the relationship should be like. So I'm trying to do a little bit better than that. So the kind of organizing claim, and this just comes from Velleman, it's a little bit rejiggered for my purposes, but it's what I call dignity spectrum. So Velleman's thought is that respect is the required minimum reaction to dignity, and love is the permitted maximum reaction to dignity. So but dignity is the fittingness condition for both love and respect. And then there's this kind of spectrum of reactions that you might have towards that one value, where respect is required of everyone, so everyone's required to respect dignity. And so that's the required minimum. And then love is much more robust in certain ways. And partly because of that, it's merely permitted, it's not required. But it is this kind of maximal reaction to that same value. Okay, so what I want to do is be able to explain that. So the Kantian claim easily explains the love part, because the Kantian claim says that, maybe I should actually see what it says. It says that everybody's lovable in virtue of having dignity. And I think somebody's lovable just in case it's objectively permitted to love them. So that's a kind of analytic truth about lovability. And so the Kantian claim all on its own, plus some analytic truths about lovability, explains why love is objectively permitted, always objectively permitted. Now, I mean, I haven't said anything about this kind of maximum thing, but I can tell you if you want. But that's the kind of deontic explanation. Now, the other one is actually more puzzling, but this is just kind of the puzzle at the heart of Kantian ethics. So, why is it that respect is the objectively required minimum reaction to dignity? So, in order to explain that, you have to think that A, having dignity always provides objectively decisive reasons to respect A. So that is a pretty extreme claim. One of the reasons why that's an extreme claim is that means that the reason to respect that's provided by dignity is undefeatable. Right? There's no fact that you could bring to bear that would show that you shouldn't respect somebody with dignity. So, I mean, this just gets you into the kind of aggregation puzzles about deontology. So, even if 1 million people would be saved if you didn't respect A, this Kantian claim that dignity always provides decisive reason entails that even that fact, the fact that you could save 1 million people if you disrespected A, even that fact can't defeat the reason to respect A provided by A's dignity. So I'm definitely not defending, I think actually that's probably what my view is, but I'm not really arguing for that here. Really, this is just the thing that you would have to say in order for that to be true within this framework. And that, if that were true, then it would explain why respect is the required minimum reaction to dignity. Okay, so that's the love, some of the love and respect. I won't say that much about the fittingly respecting bit. So the very end of the paper is about fittingly loving. So the paper up to this point was really just about fitting loving, and then the last part is about fittingly loving. So let me just get everybody on board with the distinction. So think about the differences between mere true belief and knowledge. So plausibly, truth is the fittingness condition for belief. So if you have a true belief, then you have a fitting belief. But in order to fittingly believe some truth, more has to be the case. So in order to know, and I think fittingly believing is just knowledge. In order to know, you have to have some relation to the truth. So if you just had a lucky guess and you got something right, you had a mere true belief, you would have a fitting belief, but you wouldn't be fittingly believing. So that is just a completely general distinction between things that you can draw with things that are fitting. So it's worth thinking about that when it comes to love, and I think it makes a big difference. So the way to make it more concrete is to think about this necessary condition on fittingly fine. So I think in order to fittingly phi, you have to possess sufficient reasons to phi. And in order to possess, they have to be kind of within your ken in a certain kind of way. So here's the one thing I'll say about respect. I think that knowing that somebody has dignity or is a person, that is sufficient for possessing decisive reason to respect them. So merely knowing is enough with respect. But love is different. So I think, and many people think this, that just knowing that somebody's a person. So if somebody came up to you and told you the name of somebody on the other side of the world and told you that they were a person, you would come to know that that person is a person. But I don't think you'd be in a position to fittingly love them. So the kind of general intuition is you have to be acquainted in some way with somebody in order to fittingly love them. Just kind of knowing that they exist is not enough. Although Kant did not think that, but Kant did not get out much, so probably should not take his word for interpersonal relationship things. Okay, so right. So let me just tell you the view. So my view is that you have to be acquainted with their determinate dignity in order to possess the reason to love them. And that's the difference between love and respect when it comes to fittingly loving or respecting. And then this leads to a big disagreement with Satya. And here's the puzzling conclusion from plausible premises thing. So Satya thinks that in order to be sufficiently acquainted, all you need to do is be able to have singular thoughts about the individual, which means to be able to kind of directly think about them. So, not think about them merely through description. So Satya's favorite example is you might know about someone via the description that they're the shortest spy. So, someone might say, the shortest spy has brown hair. The shortest spy wears, I guess, small shoes, probably, size 7 shoes. So you could know a bunch of stuff about the shortest spy. But that would just be, you could think a lot of stuff about the shortest spy, but that would not be singular thought. Now, if you met the shortest spy and you knew his name was Bob or whatever, then you could have singular thoughts about the shortest spy. You could have singular thoughts about Bob, who happens to be the shortest spy. Of course, you could have singular thoughts about Bob without knowing he's the shortest spy. Probably a good spy, so you wouldn't know he's the shortest spy, because you wouldn't know he's a spy. Okay, so Satya thinks as long as you can have singular thoughts, you're sufficiently acquainted. Okay, but and then he thinks, and we both agree that if you're sufficiently acquainted, then you can have extreme levels of partiality. So the same amount of partiality you have towards your family and your loved ones, your loved ones. So that means, on Satya's view, you could justifiably save, the receptionist at your dentist at the expense of many other people, just like you can justifiably save your father or your partner at the expense of the lives of several other people. And he thinks this shows that the kind of justification of partiality by love comes very cheap. All you have to do is be able to have singular thought. And I disagree with that. I think the conditions are much more stringent, and in particular, you have to be acquainted with their determinate dignity. And, unless you really know the receptionist well, you're not acquainted with their determinate dignity. Or maybe if they're just super amazing, their beauty just kind of shines through when they're making your appointment or whatever. And that would be different. I think if you were acquainted and did love them on the basis of that, then a lot of partiality actually would be justified. But that isn't how most receptionists are, and thus you probably are not acquainted with their dignity, even though you'd have singular thoughts about them. Okay, so that's the big kind of normative ethical difference between me and Satya, and I think that, why go for the weird thing when you can go for the plausible thing? Okay, I'm going to stop there because I've already taken too much time. Thank you.